Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. Now we understand the fact that United Nations General Assembly has recognized the human right to be that of course, provision of a safe, clean and a healthy environment. By that yardstick, then it's very important to understand the fact that how at a very core level does the environment in one way or the other impact our basic human and fundamental rights. And this is something upon which we'll be talking about during the course of today's conversation. Overall, we'll be talking about how does not only environment challenges but also different issues related to environment, be it climate change, be it loss of biodiversity, be it air pollution, or for that matter even water pollution, and plastic mismanagement to not only adversely impact our health but also the society at large. How over a period of time we have seen that climate induced migration has definitely led to a loss of cultural heritage, and socially how does this in turn impact our relationships and for that matter even contribute to our mental health stresses. In this regard, then it's also very imperative to mention at the outset that we do have laws and policies so as to curb, so as to curtail various environmental challenges, but the question then remains that to what effect and to what extent have these been successful in actually being implemented. That is also something upon which we'll be shedding light. Last but not the least, we'll also be talking about the dire need for individuals, for the community and of course for the government itself to come together so as to devise solutions to all our environmental problems. All of this today on The Society, that too with a very diverse panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Dr. Masood Makhtoom Saab, who's a conservationist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. Alongside him, I have Ms. Zara Gilani, who's an environmentalist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Assalamualaikum.
And my third panelist for the show today is Ms. Samavia Sajjad, who's a legal and policy expert. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I would like to start the show with you, sir. We understand the fact that Pakistan has not one, rather various environmental challenges to tackle. In this regard, climate change is something which is very pressing. Then we also understand the fact that plastic pollution is also something which has been resurfacing time and again. And then, of course, we cannot ignore the fact too that there has been loss of biodiversity too. But as a distinguished conservationist in your own right, what do you feel is the most pressing challenge of these all?
When we talk about the overall climate change perspective.
Right, sir.
So, from my perspective, I think climate change is, of course, a very cross-cutting challenge that Pakistan is facing right now, because if you look at your the emission factors, we are almost at the bottom level. But when it comes to the vulnerability perspective context, then we are all the time for the last 10 to 12 years, we have been on the top 10 list of the countries. So it is very important that to understand that why it is happening,
right.
And because we are geographically located in such a place where you can see the after the North Pole and the South Pole, the third largest pole is the that we have got is the third pole that we call it the Himalayas and the Hindu
right,
Kush and the Karakoram. You can see the number of glaciers, you can see the water towers over there. So a little bit of change in the temperature can increase your vulnerability at a very fast speed.
Of course.
So you can see the water coming from the glaciers and it reaches to the sea. It's just a matter of only
which is why, sir, we are actually experience, you see, in ways more than one more hotter climates, and this is something which was perhaps not the case more than a decade ago. On which, madam, I'll come to you. Here we must also talk about the way all these issues then impact the society, and in this regard we also understand the fact that environmental issues are social justice issues. How particularly do you feel do all these issues then in turn disproportionately impact the more vulnerable segments of the Pakistani society, be it women, be it children, or even for that matter the elderly population?
Actually, we have to look at our society, at our culture. We see that although women make 49% of the population, yet they do not have equal chances and opportunities to get to the resources. So, like we had floods in 2022, and we saw that women were badly affected. Women of childbearing age were pregnant and were on family way, were malnourished, and it was very difficult for them. They were anemic and yet they were giving birth at the same time in those difficult circumstances.
And there were women who were actually more prone to gender-based violence too. We did
Yes.
see so many incidents of gender-based violence coming in times of all these floods, like post these floods and all.
Very true, because we see these, makeshift shelters where the families take refuge, and in these shelters, a lot of children get lost. These are then forced into early child marriages, and these are these women who bear the brunt.
Right.
So we look at it in this way that, in our society, women cannot even travel alone. They get harassed while traveling, and government has, set up these ration distribution points where these women cannot reach and get access to.
But here, madam, we must also talk about the impact on children and elderly. We have
Very
seen
true,
that
very
in
true.
case of the elderly people and very young children, they have actually suffered from really serious health hazards. And of course, by virtue of their age, they become more vulnerable to such health calamities.
Due to these climate change calamities, we've seen again, last year, there was outbreak of malaria and waterborne diseases, and then, malnourishment. So these elderly and infirm, the youth, the younger people were, greatly affected.
Right, madam. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Samavia. Here we must also talk about the impact of climate-induced migration, because time and again we have seen that people are very prone to migrating so as to be able to do away with various climate-induced disasters. But in this regard, you not then feel that this again becomes a very pressing issue, more so especially when it leads to loss of cultural heritage. To what extent have our laws and policies actually been able to take care of this, and to what extent do you feel do we actually need to devise solutions so as to be able to cater to the same?
So when you talk about it very specifically, our laws are silent on this matter. We don't have any specific legislation or policy that deals with it, but Pakistan has taken a lot of international commitments. And one of that commitment is to make people adaptive of the consequences of the climate change as well. So in this regard, our constitution can be extended to the fact, like she was talking about school-going children. So Article 25A, like that talks about the right to education. So the government did set up some camps when during the flood days, but like we know that they are not adequate or a permanent solution. A more permanent solution would be inclusion of such legislation in our system which actually prepares the students and the women as well beforehand for the consequences, and that would indirectly then lead to the fact that government would be more aware on how to deal with these things.
Right, Samavia. On which, sir, I'll come to you. Here we must also talk about the issue of nature conservation, and this, as we all understand, is something which has been prioritized worldwide. So when it comes to Pakistan, what focus particularly has been placed on nature conservation, be it in different sectors of water, of agriculture, or even forestry?
To be very honest, nature conservation has never been the priority for this country. And we have been struggling for the last like 30, 40, 50 years in order to prioritize this as a sector. Because you see, this is the sector that where it provides you with all the basics of your living. The one thing that I want to talk about is that if you take the example of a water, so water is providing you with is 93% of the water, 92% of the water is going to agriculture. So you can see that how much water is required with agriculture sector.
Right.
So if you see that, look at the development nowadays, it's an environmental degradation all over. So you can see the natural forests are being degraded. You can, if you're flying over some of the natural over the mountains, you can see all these lights are just lit on the top of the mountains.
So Pakistan has lost so much of its forest cover, if you see the statistics too. But sir, then moving on, you say that Pakistan has not been able to prioritize these issues, but we do have strategies in place, and I'll quote one. Pakistan has national conservation strategy in place so as to be able to tackle various environmental concerns. So what then is the effectiveness of strategies like these? Because it does seem then, at least to the level of strategies and policies, we at least have one national document which is supposed to be the guiding force.
National conservation strategy was developed by government of Pakistan, and then as a result, that was a basic guiding document that provides you with the vision and the goal that how to prioritize your nature conservation interventions or initiatives in the country. The second step was that when we talk about, because that's the national level document, but in order to implement that document, you really need to go down, deep dive. So when you're diving deep into at the provincial level, so we do have the provincial conservation strategies as well. But at that level, yes, it gives you the provincial level VN other goals. But in order to implement that, so there are few examples that we have got the district level conservation strategies as well. So the purpose of having these district level conservation strategies was to implement interventions at the local level, so that we can address the impacts of climate change, so that we can address the impacts of deforestation, so that we can address the impacts of water
So basically
losses.
ensure various environmental challenges they are tackled with basically in our everyday lives. So then to sum it up, it would be right to say then that we do have these strategies, be it at the national level, be it at the provincial level, more particularly after the 18th Amendment, and at the district level too, but a lot needs to be done when it comes to their implementation. Madam, coming towards you, here we must talk about your work with the government, and we understand that you've been very actively working on urban afforestation in this regard. So tell us, what all do projects like these entail, and how effective have they in themselves been in making the environment more green, because that I understand is the basic purpose of this very project.
Yes, that's very true. The cities, the urban landscape, they become heat islands, and it is very necessary, for the people, the citizens, the governments to, bring about the urban afforestation, to give relief to that raising temperature that is created by the urban heat effect island. So for that, I've been very actively working with the government departments. We, the civil society, we've collaborated with the government, and we've done a number of plantation drives. And not only that, but awareness campaigns and given presentations at the grassroots levels to the schools, the underprivileged schools, because they make the majority of the population.
Right.
So we wanted to reach at every level and try to spread the word.
That's very rightly put by yourself, but one positive development that we do see emerging in the Pakistani society is the fact that over time we do see that generally the average Pakistani has become more aware and cognizant of their environmental rights too, which is definitely something which should be welcomed. But moving on, when we talk about other measures, prioritizing urban afforestation, because we understand that this is just not that one-stop solution so as to be able to tackle climate change effectively, what more do you feel needs to be done both at the state level, at the community level?
We've seen that the government has taken a lot of initiative in climate change crisis, and we've seen Shahbaz Sharif government give 8 billion to the flood affectees, to the farmers, and also give subsidies on fertilizers. They've also come up with a crop insurance project, although it has a narrow scope, but then they are trying their best to make a difference. And then we see the Blue Road Initiative. I think it will make a great difference, And also there's a number of things that the government can do. We should basically focus on the renewables.
That's very rightly put by yourself. But here, Samavi, I would want to take your narrative too, because here we also understand the fact that the Pakistan Superior Judiciary, more particularly the High Court and the Supreme Court, they have also gone a long way so as to ensure that we get climate justice. And in this regard, there was this time where we had that landmark case of Shehla Zia. Back in the 1990s, and then we have seen various judgments emerging. One I remember was also a very landmark case of Honorable Justice Mansoor Ali Shah Saab. So moving on, when we talk about all these judicial precedents, to what extent as a legal and policy expert do you feel has Pakistan's judiciary been able to actually bridge that gap between citizens and the state?
I think courts have played a very remarkable role when it comes to public interest litigation in regards of environment specifically. Like you mentioned, starting from the Shehla Zia case, it was actually envisioned by the court and then passed on to the citizens that it is their grave and very dire need of that right. That environmental right is already given in the constitution through right of life and right to dignity as well. And then when we move forth to other judgments, like you said, Sayyid Mansoor Ali Shah's judgment, it dealt with the motor vehicles, and it was very necessary in the sense because most of the pollution, especially especially the smog in Punjab, was being caused by motor vehicles use.
Right.
There was very specific terms and specific conditions put that the motor vehicles should be in such a way that it does not contribute much to the negativity towards the environment and air pollution. Then we had a very remarkable case of canal widening case. Now
Right.
the debate for the first time arose was whether there should be development against the cost of environment as well. And I think it was already written theoretically in our law, but practically it was the first time it was implemented in such a way that citizens actually started that debate,
Right.
that there has
That
to be...
case was one of its own kind. I remember there was
Yes.
so much hype
Yeah.
about this case, even on social media. You would also remember this because you've also been part of some very active PIL, that is public interest litigation, that too with the Lahore High Court. So tell us more about that, because you've been also working on this very area.
On its directions, the Punjab Urban and Peri-Urban Forest Policy was launched back in 2019, and our civil society group, we were made part of that committee that gave suggestions for its subject policy. So we suggested that environmental education made mandatory in schools and universities and educational institutes. Other than that, we suggested that research departments from universities to collaborate with the government.
Which is very important, because you see this in itself is also a very big problem, because until and unless you have proper statistics, you can't make policies which are well informed. Onward, sir, I'll come to you. Here we must talk about this very important point that Ms. Amavia has very rightly so raised, which is that of basically ensuring that every project, every business, every industry does its own environment impact assessment. Here we do understand the fact that there are two conflicting and competing interests that we have to strike a balance between. One is that, of course, of land development. The other is that of ensuring that you proceed with land development, but you don't do it at a cost which actually contributes or adversely impacts the environment. So how then do you propose can we strike that balance? Because both of them are very important in their own right.
These are both are very important, but we're not against economic development as well. So what we really are concerned about is the environment. So it is not only that the development has to take place in any case, but because if you see, do we have the real land use plans for that or for that region? So first of all, we need to know that where is the land use plan. So we have to develop our society, we have to develop our lands according to the land use plans. So if there's no land use plan, then at least we have to go to the next level. The next level is whenever we're going for a large infrastructure, whenever we are going for something big, at least there are certain protocols that needs to be followed.
Right.
So these protocols needs to be like in initial environmental examinations. If it is a small project, then environmental impact assessment, it is a bigger project, and then if it is like a landscape level project, then you definitely have to go for a strategic environmental impact assessment.
So of course it will then depend on the nature of the project that you are undertaking.
Exactly.
Rightly so.
So it's nature, and plus it's also depends on which ecosystem are you in at that level, because it doesn't. So you are not going to do any development in the natural forest. So you have to take care of of the environment as well. So when we are talking about the natural forest in the Galiyat or somewhere in the KPK region, so you definitely have to take care of the environment by putting in certain restrictions. And that restriction, if you are in any case, if you are trying to give the authority or give the permission to do that, but you still have got a lot of other implications that you need to follow. We have to go straight away for development. Maybe wildlife corridors could be one thing. Maybe developing protected areas and conserving the core areas.
That's very rightly put by yourself, and this we understand is something which will then vary from case to case, because a lot of factors would then actually come into play, on which I'll come to you, Ms. Amavia. Here we must also talk about the legal framework which then exists so as to be able to make that decision that yes, in this case environmental impact assessment is such that the particular industry, that the particular business should be given permission to proceed, and this is that one case they shouldn't be allowed to so proceed. Because even when we talk about this from a practical viewpoint, a lot of litigation in courts actually arises on this very issue. You would be remembering so many landmark judgments coming out of this too. So what is that reasonable test that the law then lays down that yes, based on this test we will allow this project to proceed?
So we have the Environmental Act for each province. After the 18th Amendment, it has become provincial, but the essence more or less remains the same of each act. So basically what happens is that once any project of development is being undertaken, you need to weigh out, or you need to have those environmental assessments carried out.
Right.
Under the Act, there are environmental agencies formed in each province. Those agencies and the person who is starting the development are supposed to coordinate in such a way that they then sort of assess the environmental impacts. There is a screening done. The screening is done whether how detrimental the particular development would be for the environment.
Right.
Then there is a data collection method as well, where the environmental agency is going to aid that particular project. There are national environmental quality standard sets, and if it falls within those standards, only then you carry forth with that particular development.
Otherwise, you can't.
Otherwise, you cannot carry forward. Theoretically and legally speaking,
Of
you
course.
cannot carry forward with that particular development in that sense. And then later on stage, I think it is also responsibility of every business, and also by law of every business, every development, every factory owner to also, even then, even if you're falling under those quality standards, you still need to take into regard the minimal effect which you can give to the environment.
Right. So
by
there
your
needs to
project.
be a cost benefit analysis
Yes.
then overall of the whole project,
Yes.
in light of which of course that decision is made. But then what about hazardous substances and usage of toxic chemicals, because that in itself is also something which not only impacts our health adversely, that is also something which adds to the pollution cost too. So what kind of legal checks and balances do we have in place to actually cater to this particular issue?
Yes, like sir rightly pointed out, that we are not against the development, or we are not against the fact that reality exists. You need to run the factories. Again,
course.
we have those quality standards set in the law. The amount of the toxic or effluents that could be discharged in the water or in the air is set by those standards. And when you do it according to those standards, I think it minimizes the effect that goes on to the environment.
Right. So then again the focus goes on to the implementation mechanism, something which you very
Definitely.
rightly so basically mentioned. Madam, but coming towards you, here we must also talk about the various challenges which then might be faced so as to overcome all these challenges that we have talked about, more particularly climate change. So in this regard, what challenges do you feel are the most imminent ones, and how do you propose can we actually overcome the same?
Yes, very true. I think to begin with, we need to understand the gravity of the situation, and we used to switch to a better terminology. We should stop focusing on climate change, but to look into climate crisis that we are faced with. And like last year floods that we saw, and we are standing on the brink of 1.5 raise in global average temperatures.
Right.
By 2027. And if this trend continues, then we will see 20 million people displaced if there is a 2-degree increase in global average temperatures.
Right.
And these people will be from South Asia, and most likely majority of them are going to be from Pakistan.
That's very rightly put by yourself. And to take this further, I think whereas we do understand the fact that despite Pakistan not being one of the most imminent or global contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, it is still unfortunately categorized to be one of the most vulnerable countries worstly hit by climate change. So in this context, then, do you not feel that the responsibility lies on the developed countries so as to be able to help developing countries to tackle this very crisis?
Yes, very true. We last year, after the devastation that was faced by Pakistan due to climate crisis, we heard our Minister of Environment, Sherry Rahman, at the international level in Egypt, the climate summit that was held.
Right.
She was actually demanding of the global West, who were actually the polluters, and because of them, Pakistan had to bear the brunt of this devastation. So she demanded of the West to help not only in technology, but also, grant funds for the betterment of the people who were affected.
Ms. Zara, so then again the focus needs to be not only in seeking a financial assistance, but also assistance with regards to improving the way we tackle this issue using technology. To which, sir, you wanted to add something?
Because technologies are playing an important role in our development.
Right.
So if you talk about the renewable energy technology, and if you talk about the technology within the agriculture sector, specifically in the form of mechanization purposes, And the technology that you talk about in the water sector, especially in the form of weather stations or the improved weather capacities that we need to enhance within our country in order to project the climate projections within the country. So these are all sort of technologies that we really need to enhance within Pakistan. But these are not the only technologies. So we really need to introduce, enhance our infrastructure capabilities. Then in addition to that, it's not only infrastructure, but also needs to do the financing, enough financing. So once we have got the technologies and infrastructure and financing available, then the fourth point would be to build the capacity of our own people.
Of course.
It's not only that we have to bring the expertise from the Western world.
We have to train the people
we have
so
to
as
train
to be
our
able to
people
use
so
it
that it can be
effectively.
more sustainable.
Right.
And then the awareness about those technologies,
Right.
how you're talking about the cost benefit analysis
Right.
previously. So it was basically that how these technologies are effective, are beneficial for us.
On which I'll come to you, Ms. Amavia. Hey, we must also talk about the theme of World Environment Day, which was of beat plastic pollution. In this regard, we've also seen the Federal Minister for Climate Change, Sherry Raman Saiba, being very vocal about this issue, and rightly so, because this is a very pressing issue. So when we talk about doing away with plastic mismanagement, when we talk about ensuring plastic disposal is rightly so done, and that too in a way which doesn't have an impact on the environment adversely, do you not feel here that the responsibility lies on the society too? Yes, the government can in its own right bring in the requisite laws, it can bring in the regulatory framework, but then do you not feel, so as to be able to implement it, we do need active community engagement?
I completely agree with you, Fatma, on this regard, because environmental right is such a right that you will not be able to go through with it unless and until we realize our individual responsibility as well. So individual responsibility definitely starts from homes and schools. When you look at the regulation as well that was announced on the World Environment Day by the Pakistani cabinet, I think it's very remarkable in the sense that it talks about individual responsibilities.
Exactly.
The plastic products they have mentioned in that are used on everyday basis in our homes and in schools specifically. So I think such regulation will be a very good first step, not just to eliminate plastic, but also to create that subconscious awareness in homes as well.
Right.
So I think that because we all know that plastic stays on for years and it damages the ecosystem, and earlier before that there was no such mechanism specifically banning these particular products that we use on our everyday basis.
But then again, this reinforces the fact that we do need community engagement at every level so as to be able to enforce all these initiatives and laws effectively. On which, sir, I'll come to you, and here we must talk about the SDGs before we conclude today's show. The SDGs very categorically provide a global framework of and for sustainable development. How particularly do you feel are Pakistan's laws and policies aligned with the same?
Thank you for that. And I think this global framework was first introduced in all over the globe in 2016.
Right.
It was for a period of 15 years, basically. Its implementation frameworks says that. And under that, there are more than like 170 indicators that has been categorized under these SDGs. But when we talk about our environment, when we talk about the climate change, there are like specific 6 or 7 specific SDGs that we talk about. The one, like we start with SDG 6 that talks about water, then 7, and then 12, and 13, and 15, 16, and 17. So these are some of the SDGs that which are very relevant to climate change, water, very relevant to our sustainable consumption and production, very relevant to life under the water, life above the land, and the partnerships basically.
Right.
So we're all here for the partner. One thing that I wanted, these are very well managed indicators. They have got the different targets. They have got everything.
So,
there.
but then the question is that are they well integrated
this is
in
what-
our environmental plans and programs and policies? Because that is something of crucial concern.
So when we have got the global indicators, we have got the global targets and everything. Where is our national targets in that? Have we specified them from Pakistan's perspective? Because my problems are different here in Pakistan. So if they are talking about the water, this is more of a global work. But when we talk about the water in the context of Pakistan, my targets and my indicators will be totally different. So we need to adapt our own indicators and targets about that. So right now, all the provincial planning and development departments are in the process of developing these specific targets for their own provinces.
Right.
So what they are doing is that they are actually developing their own SDGs frameworks within their own provinces, and then these frameworks will be able to move around with all the government departments, academia, and also to the NGOs and civil society organizations.
So then it's just not a question of having proper compliance with the SDGs as per the laws and policies. It's also about having the proper frameworks and the right systems so as to be able to ensure their proper implementation too. On which, Madam, I'll come to you, and before we conclude today's show, if you were to actually sum up today's show, what advice would you give to all the people out there, especially with regards to making the right lifestyle choices, the right eco-friendly choices, so as to be able to tackle the various environmental issues that we are faced with, be it climate change or any other issue that we have talked about?
I think at this point I would like to say that we start with the government level, that the government should recognize those startups that are eco-friendly and give them the credits. Those people who are moving towards the renewable energy sources, they're given the credit for using, green energy, green and clean energy. And at our own level, a personal level, I think we all need to be very conscious, and we have become, because of the disasters that we've been facing, and they were like jolts to us, and that was like a wake-up call.
Right.
And each one of us can now take steps towards an eco-friendly environment that would help
and do little things, like I remember the fact in Denmark, people actually prefer to cycle, and that in that way they actually cut down on the vehicular emissions. So little changes in your own lifestyle, which might actually cost you a little bit of inconvenience, but at the same time those which would have a positive impact on the society.
But on this level, on a personal level, we need to see that we use less plastics, so as to
we recycle. The focus needs to be on
reuse
recycling.
and reduce, and try to mend things like we used to do in older times. Our grandmothers used to mend things and reuse them. So we've abandoned those traditions, and we buy new things. We have to stick to
And
less.
here the role of sustainable fashion also kicks in. There are so many facets of this very issue, and there are so many ways in which you can actually make a positive impact, on which I'll come to you, Samavi. And before we conclude today's show, here a very important responsibility also lies on the Pakistani media, and I'm also talking about films here. I'm talking about short videos that we see on social media, even theatre for that matter. So whereas we do see the Pakistani media picking up issues of social importance, be it crimes against women, be it crimes against children, even transgender issues, do you not feel that environment should also be on their priority list?
I think it should be, and now is the time that we need to start making it as a priority as well, because every citizen you see would be scrolling through their social media, through their phones at all times, or even when you're sitting at home, you have your televisions on at all the times. So consciously to make people aware of their right and to the changes they can make in their lifestyle and the responsibility the government has, because people are not aware of the responsibility the government has as well,
Right.
to provide them with a clean environment. I think the short films, small reels, videos can play a very important role when it comes to creating awareness about the environment, and also making people aware of the fact that it is an integral right that
of course, it
they
is a
have.
fundamental rights of
Yeah.
theirs, and this is all included in our right to life. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much, Ms.
Thank
Zara.
you.
And thank you so much, Ms. Samavia. Thank you for being here with us today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the various environmental challenges which Pakistan is faced with. We also spoke about the fact that how environmental justice is just not merely an environmental issue, it is also, of course, a social justice issue. We spoke about the need to very actively implement the laws which actually exist so as to be able to tackle all these various environmental issues. One thing that we do actively need to focus upon is, of course, the fact that we need to ensure that the community at large, that the society at large is mobilized and is, of course, made aware of these very relevant laws too. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.